Welcome back, guys, to another edition of the MMA Pick'ems podcast here, and this is for UFC 257, Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier 2 in their rematch. And before I jump into that card, I actually wanted to just kind of review the card that we bet on in the previous week, and that was the Holloway versus Cater card. Wasn't able to tape or really watch the Wednesday fight card, but so yeah, we'll just review that card, and I'm gonna do things a little bit differently for this card. Still, feeling out this whole podcast, kind of get my footing here. So I do apologize to all 5 of my viewers who are actually watching this. So first fight of the night. Actually, let's go over the picks. We ended up going 5 out of 10 for picks, which not a great way to start the year off, but there were a lot of upsets that card, and yeah, it was a pretty rough card, honestly, but. From a betting perspective, not too bad. We lost 0.32 units on the night. Could have been a lot worse, but we did have a redeeming fight. So let's go ahead and break this down real quick. Had a 0.2 unit bet on the Lingo versus Kilburn fight. Had Kilburn to win by KO, TKO. I just thought it would have played out a lot closer in that, they would end up trading and someone would end up, getting knocked out. But, Lingo really stepped up. Good for him. He kind of ran away with it after landing that shot on Kilburn early, and it just seemed like Kilburn might have just been on autopilot after getting caught there early. So on to the next fight. We in the first leg of our parlay we had Carlos Felipe versus Justin Tafa, and I had Felipe in that one, and man, that was way too close for comfort, honestly. Felipe looked good in the second round. He was really tentative in the first round, and I thought that if he did what he was doing in the second round during the first round, he would have had a lot more success. Would have banked those 2 rounds and not had to squeak out that split decision win. But yeah, going forward, it's gonna be tough putting any money on Felipe. Tafa did a lot better than expected after just how much I shit on him, but it didn't really matter since the second leg of our parlay we had Buckley. He got head kicked. Pretty spectacular KO by DeCarico, not going to lie, but I don't think anyone really saw that coming, and that kind of fucked up our parlay there. But that's just MMA, it's people are going to get those head kicks. They're going to get those spinning back fists, the elbows. It's just part of the game, and good for DeCarico. I think he ended up saving his job there. He was probably going to get cut if he lost, so good for him. And then the other fight that we had a bet on was the Todorovic versus Soriano, and man, what a poor showing by Soriano there. It's very, very, or not Soriano, by Todorovic. Just terrible fight IQ. I mean, part of the reason I picked him, was because I thought that if the fight got tough, he'd try and take it to the ground or try and clinch up. He showed that in the Teddy Ash fight, but against Soriano, he got clipped and continued to not keep his hand up, just rely on that head movement, and ended up eating like 4 or 5 bombs before just going down, and just a really, really, really just lack of just fight IQ for Todorovic there. And man, I don't know. That was a very, very bad look. But moving on, we had Jocelyn Edwards versus Yanan Wu, and kind of hit the nail on the head there. Put 1.5 units on her. Well, I put 1 unit originally, and then ended up going the extra half unit because I felt like the odds were going to flip, and they did. Jocelyn Edwards, the rightful favorite, should have kind of handled business there, was much better on the feet, and she did end up gassing, but I mean, she was coming in on short notice, so give her a pass there. She ended up getting the job done, ended up banking 2 rounds. So overall, kind of bailed me out. Jocelyn Edwards could have had a really bad night, but ended up only losing 0.32 units officially. And with that, I think that'll do it for the recap. We'll go right into this 257 card and hopefully have a nice little bounce back night. And in the first fight of the night, we have Zhalgas Zhumagulov, the -120 favorite, versus Amir Albazi, the +100 underdog. And this is a pretty interesting fight between two, I was going to say prospects, but I don't really think Zhalgas is a prospect at this point. He is 32. Little bit older, and seems to have a bit more decorated resume coming into this fight. Both of these guys have only had 1 fight in the UFC, but I think Amir is the more the prospect here. He's a bit younger, shows a bit of potential, very well-rounded game. But yeah, as far as what he does well, I mean, he has a pretty good wrestling base, but overall, he's a really well-rounded fighter. He has decent stand-up and decent BJJ, but I don't think he's a real specialist in anything at this point. He's kind of like one of these new age fighters, new age MMA fighters who are just very well-rounded. Doesn't really have any sort of weakness, but also isn't really super proficient in any aspect of the game. So I think if he keeps progressing, he could be top 15 potential kind of guy. But I don't see him making a title run or anything. I don't think he's athletic or really technical enough in any aspect to make a title run. But who knows? He's still young. He could just make some crazy improvements here. And as far as his level of competition so far, that is a little bit concerning. He's fought relative nobodies this whole time, and I'd say that his toughest opponent to date is Jose Torres, who I feel like is actually UFC caliber. I mean, he was in the UFC for a little while, but outside of that, I mean, his second best opponent, I'd say is probably Malcolm Gordon in his UFC debut. But honestly, I just feel that Gordon is a bit of a fraud. He's super chinny and actually not particularly skilled anywhere, and was able to and Albazi was able to handle Gordon pretty easily in that first fight. The only thing I don't really like about Albazi is he is kind of sloppy and his stand-up is a bit stiff. He has good technical boxing, but he seems a little bit slow for the division. He is a big dude. He's really jacked for the division, super muscular. But something else I didn't really like was some of his takedowns. He shot kind of sloppily, and he a lot of the times if they're decent at scrambling, he'll end up on the bottom or in a very compromised position. So that's something I think he could touch up a bit. But he is young, he's making improvements, so I expect him to get a little better here. And his opponent Zhalgas Zhumagulov, I think, has fought much better competition. He's coming from the Russian regional scene, Fight Nights Global. He was the champ there, and I believe did have a title defense there as well. And can't bring this up with people saying he was gifted a decision, a robbery decision against Ulanbekov, which I don't think that was a robbery. It was a very close fight. Ulanbekov did have a lot of control time in that fight, but I think Zhumagulov was the much busier fighter off his back. Every time he got taken down, he was working the punches, working the elbows, and the judges scored it that way. He was the busier fighter. He was doing more damage, and on the feet, he did pull ahead too. So I think he was the rightful winner of that fight. Just I think people just really liked Ulanbekov because of the Khabib ties, but yeah, that wasn't a robbery. And I think this is going to play a factor in this fight, especially if Albazi is going to take Zhumagulov down. Zhumagulov is going to be the one that's staying busy even off his back, and Albazi not really great with the top control or even the ground and pound. So on the ground, I do give the slight advantage to Albazi, but I think Zhumagulov is going to be the busier fighter. And in regards to just how the fight will play out on the feet, I think Zhumagulov has got the quicker hands, probably the slightly more technical striking. He has a really nice jab and hook that he likes to throw, very aggressively actually with the hooks. But he has quick hands and quite a bit of power in it. And he's fought some UFC caliber guys and gave a pretty good account of himself. I mean, he's fought guys like Tyson Nam and Tagir Ulanbekov and even Raulian Paiva. He looked really good in that fight, and some people would argue that he won, but I mean, it was a close fight. All I'm saying is Zhumagulov, he's decent competitor, decent competition, pretty good, striking, and is really good off his back. So, for that reason, I do slightly lean Zhumagulov. I think what it really comes down to is how the judges are going to score some of these, the wrestling, especially, because I do think that once Albazi starts getting touched up a bit by Zhumagulov, he's going to shoot for the takedown. He probably will get the takedown. It's just, how the judges will score any of the damage that gets done there. I'm guessing they will score it in favor of Zhumagulov just because in the previous card they did favor the damage being done over just control time. But I guess it'll come down to whether or not Albazi's going to be landing much ground and pound. But from what I've seen so far, not too impressed with Albazi's ground game so far. So I am leaning Zhumagulov here, and at minus 120, I haven't put a bet on him yet, but I am considering it. It's not a terrible price to pay for Zhumagulov, who I think should be able to pull ahead on the feet and do enough on the ground to secure a decision here. So the pick is Zhumagulov, and no bet just yet, but I might lock something in within the next couple of days. So, be sure to follow me on my Bet MMA Tips page. And in the next fight, we have Nick Lentz versus Movsar Evloev. And let's take a look at the odds for this one real quick. So Nick Lentz, he's the plus 340 underdog, and Movsar is the minus 440 favorite at the time of recording this. And, a little wide here, but let's take a look at both of these fighters. So let's start with Movsar here. Movsar is another prospect that they that they're pitting against a veteran in Nick Lentz. But as far as Movsar go, he's a pretty well-rounded fighter himself. Again, his wrestling is really his bread and butter, but he's made some pretty significant strides in his striking. At least, from what I've seen in the UFC, he seemed to have improved every fight, which is really impressive. He's pretty young, so that is expected. But yeah, he's looked really good so far on the feet, and it's good to know that he does have like the wrestling in his back pocket too. As you could see in his his UFC debut against Sung Woo Choi, he was able to really just run away with it with the wrestling. And in his next fight against Enrique Barzola, he pretty much beat Barzola up for 2 rounds before Barzola was able to really start to get a read on things and mount his own offense late in the third, well, mid to late third, and was able to get a decision in that fight. And then in his most recent fight, Movsar did go up against Mike Grundy, who actually had Movsar in a pretty compromising choke early in the fight, but Movsar was able to tough it out and eventually get the decision. Was able to just completely outbox Grundy on the feet in the latter rounds. Grundy just didn't have any sort of striking that was able to match Movsar's. But yeah, I mean this guy's a solid prospect. He's coming out of the Russian regional scene. He was the champ there, M1. And he was the champ there, and he's had a pretty impressive run there. So very, very solid prospect, and they're moving him along pretty well here. They're matching him up with Nick Lentz, who, they're giving him a gradual step up in competition, which is good. You want to see them slowly, work their way up in the rankings there. And then on the other side, we have Nick Lentz, who is a veteran of the sport here. He's done pretty well against actually some other vets, like Menard and Holtzman, but really does struggle against some of the younger guys, as we've seen in his fights against Oliveira and Arnold Allen. And I see this playing out pretty similarly for Movsar here. And, Movsar is just going to be the younger guy here. He's the more athletic guy, and from a stand-up perspective, I don't think that Lentz is terrible. He has good technique. The only issue is he's getting older, and he's pretty slow. I think Movsar will pretty easily be beating him to the punch, landing the harder shots, the cleaner shots. And Lentz, he's got a ton of scar tissue too, so he's gonna get a few landed clean on him, and he's gonna start bleeding, and that's just not going to be a good look in the judge's eye at all. So as far as the stand-up goes, I have Movsar, comfortably winning there. And then, I think that if it does get to the grappling, I think Movsar will probably get ahead there as well. I mean, Lentz is a solid wrestler himself, but again, he's just going to be the much older fighter. I don't know if he's able to mount, like a consistent or a wrestle-heavy game plan, because he is a bit older. I do question his cardio a bit if the fight goes on, and they're wrestling a lot as the fight gets into the later rounds. That being said, though, the main concern I do have for Evloev is he doesn't seem to take damage really well. Late in that third round, Barzola was starting to land on Movsar, and Movsar he didn't crumble per se under the pressure, but he started to struggle a bit. He wasn't wearing it really well, but fortunately it was the third round, and The fight ended there and ended afterwards, and he had already banked 2 rounds, but it is just a little concerning going forward. But with that being said, though, I just don't think Lentz is going to give Movsar too much trouble here. But at these odds at minus 440 for Movsar, I don't think there's enough value there at all. And for Lentz, at plus 340, this is, he could make this a really dirty fight. That's what Lentz kind of does. He does like to brawl, and if he could make that happen, he could eke out a decision here. But I don't think that'll happen. I think if the fight gets a little close, Movsar might just shoot for the takedown. But overall, I just see Movsar completely. I think he should be able to pick Lentz apart on the feet, to be honest. And so the pick here is Lentz. No bet on Movsar though. Might put him in a few parlays, but at minus 440, it's not going to add much value. So more than likely, I won't have a bet on this fight. But the pick is Movsar. And in the next fight, we have Andrew Sanchez, the plus 115 favorite, versus Mahmoud Muradov, the minus 135 favorite. Sorry, did I say plus 115 favorite? I meant to say Andrew Sanchez is the plus 115 underdog. And let's go over him real quick. At this point in his career, I'm not really sure, what Sanchez is going to be, considered. Maybe a gatekeeper or, like a prospect tester at this point, because if you're getting beat by Andrew Sanchez, you'd probably definitely, well, not definitely, but, you might not be UFC caliber. And I feel like Andrew Sanchez is a pretty good baseline for what I would consider a decent, UFC caliber fighter. He has a very well-rounded game. Excels a bit more in his wrestling, but I mean his striking isn't too bad, and he's just all around really 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 solid fighter who he'll test you in all aspects of your game. He's coming off a win against Wellington Turman, and like I've been saying before, I think at this point he's just a guy you kind of feed to prospects to see if they're the real deal or if they're they're a fraud. And he was able to get Turman out of there in the first round. Just very, very sloppy boxing by Turman in that fight. And the fight before that, he did fight Marvin Vettori, and Vettori just completely outboxed Sanchez there. Was able to stuff the takedowns and just really, really just destroy him. Well, not destroy him, but just kind of pick him apart on the feet there. And in the previous fight, in the fight before that against Barrio, Sanchez looked pretty good. He did get some takedowns. The third round, Barrio started to... No, wait. It was the second round. Barrio actually in the second round started to put the pressure on Sanchez. Wasn't able to get him out of there, but eventually, Sanchez was able to secure the takedown to really just win the third round there. And it was kind of competitive. It was pretty competitive in the first and third round, and then Barrio won the second round pretty handily. But basically what I'm trying to say here is, Sanchez does have that wrestling to fall back on. His striking isn't as good, but it's technical. He's just a bit slow. That's what makes him, that's why I think it makes him a very good prospect tester. If your boxing or your striking isn't up to par and you're getting knocked out by Andrew Sanchez, then definitely need to reevaluate, where you're gonna go in the UFC division. And on the other hand here, we have Mahmoud Muradov, who, a prospect. And he's had 2 wins in the UFC and has looked pretty good in both of them. One of them against Alessio Di Chirico and Trevor Smith. He gave a much better showing of himself against Trevor Smith. But I believe Smith might have been coming in short notice. I don't remember, but he was a massive favorite in that fight and eventually ended up getting the knockout late in the third. But before that, he did get matched up against Alessio Di Chirico. Was able to pretty handily outbox him in that fight. It was a pretty low output fight from what I remember. But that's just typical of a Di Chirico fight. But as far as how the fight will play out, I think Muradov will have a pretty significant advantage on the feet here. He'll likely be outboxing or out kickboxing Sanchez. And the thing I don't like to see out of Sanchez these days is he's really happy to keep the fight standing. I'm not sure why he doesn't go to a wrestling heavy game plan like he used to. I think it might just be the cardio. He isn't a really his cardio isn't terrible, but I think if he goes to wrestling heavy game plan like he did in previous fights here, he starts to gas out, and I don't think at this age he's 32. Man, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I can trust Sanchez to execute a wrestle heavy game plan in this fight. And Muradov, we haven't seen too much from his wrestling, and I think that's really what this fight is really going to hinge on, right? Just the defensive wrestling of Muradov, because I think he has gotten a few takedowns before Muradov, but I'm not sure how that's going to translate defensively. I think if he's able to stuff the takedowns of Sanchez or is able to get up relatively quickly, I think it'll discourage Sanchez from continuously shooting takedowns. And if this fight stays standing, I do heavily favor Muradov. He has a very nice jab, and he likes to go to the body. He mixes it up very well. So just on the feet, I think he's going to end up just running away with it. The only issue is really the takedown defense. And at minus 135, I actually don't think is a terrible price. He has shown some decent offensive wrestling, and so I have to assume that defensively it's somewhat on that level. And if he's able to keep this standing, he'll look like a pretty significant favorite. I'd say he'd look like a minus 160, minus 170, maybe even a bigger favorite on the feet here. But yeah, the biggest thing is just going to come down to the wrestling, and I'm not 100% certain that Andrew Sanchez is going to be shooting that many takedowns, go to a grapple heavy game plan, and be able to even hold Muradov down. So this is another one that I'm pretty heavily considering putting betting Muradov on. I'm just going to see where the line moves. Haven't locked anything in yet, but I'm leaning pretty heavily on Muradov, and we'll probably make a play on that. But yeah, I'll update my Bet MMA tips page if I do ever locking a bet in. So the pick here is Muradov, and we'll probably place a bet on him. And in this next fight, we have Khalil Rountree, the minus 315 favorite, versus Marcin Prachnio, the plus 265 underdog. And let's start with Prachnio here, who's, man, this guy has no chin. I think that's like going to be the first thing that jumps out for this guy. He is on a 3-fight losing streak in the UFC, and all of them by first round KO. I'm honestly surprised he was able to get it this far in his fighting career with such a shitty chin. But yeah, I mean, let's just go ahead and break down some of these previous fights that he had. The first one being against Sam Alvey, when he made his UFC debut. From what I remember in that fight, I think he kind of just got held in the clinch for a little bit. Looked very, very, I don't want to say tentative, maybe antsy, but yeah, he was kind of tripping over himself in that fight. I think maybe he was a little nervous, but he ended up eating a hook from Sam Alvey, and I just don't know. He probably just didn't know how to react. He just started walking forward with his hands down, and Alvey just landed clean on him and just was able to follow up and get him out of there early. And then they didn't do him any favors, putting him up against Magomed Ankalaev in his next fight. Just very high level guy, and he didn't have a chance in there, man. Kind of sucked. He only got about 7 months off, ate a head kick, and pretty much got knocked out there. And then 2 years later, he's making his return to the UFC against Mike Rodriguez, and ended up getting, I believe, eating an elbow and getting knocked out. And so I kind of wanted to look into some of his previous fights, and this guy's just as chinny even on the regional scene. So I think it's just an issue with his chin. Like, he's getting rocked by opponents even on the regional scene, but he was able to get away with it since he's pretty low level guys, and his technique isn't terrible on offense. It's just he has kind of shitty defense, and his chin is pretty awful. So yeah, there's just no way I could bet on this guy. Yeah, you can't trust that chin at all, especially against UFC level guys. They're gonna land on him, and if it does, it's over for him. He's only coming off, he's only got like, I think, 4 or 5 months off since his last fight, and I don't even think it's the time off. This guy just has no chin. Like, he took 2 years off and still ended up getting knocked out by Mike Rodriguez. So no chin Prachnio, gonna be an easy fade for me. But on the other hand, we have Khalil Rountree, who does have some pretty devastating power, but at minus 315, I don't want to lay minus 315 on him. He's offensively, he's got some good striking, good powerful punches, and seems to not really have a wrestling game though. I remember he went up against Sanchez, and in that fight he just got taken down by Sanchez, and that was it. He wasn't able to do anything. He just got held on his back, and and I believe in a recent fight against Johnny Walker, he got taken into the clinch and just ate some massive elbows and got knocked out, and ended up going to Thailand to work on his Muay Thai, because his clinch game got exposed according to him. And he looked good against Anders, but Anders just had a really, really, really bad fight. Just was standing in front of Rountree the whole fight. Just it's like he didn't know how to fight a Muay Thai fighter. He just looked like deer in headlights the whole fight. Got his leg beat up and took a ton of damage. And then Rountree ended up, in his most recent fight, getting knocked out by Kudalaba, who, not a terrible loss. Kudalaba is a brawler, and Rountree did end up obliging in those brawls, and he ended up paying for it. But man, Prachnio is just such a major step down in competition for Rountree. I don't have a lot of faith in Rountree, but at the same time, Prachnio has no chin, dude. I can't bet on Prachnio. I want to fade Prachnio, but I just don't think that Rountree's very reliable. And at minus 315, I might put him in a parlay, but no way I'm playing that straight. Minus 315 it'll still add some value to some parlays. Maybe parlay him up with someone that's like around like minus 250 or so. As of right now, though, haven't locked in a parlay yet, but might consider it. Just because Prachnio is just, his chin is done. I have a feeling he's going to get knocked out. So the pick here is Rountree. No bet yet. Might put him in a parlay. I'll add that at the end of the podcast. Of all the picks all the bets that I've made. But moving on. And in the next fight, we have a fight between Juliana Pena, the plus 110 underdog, against Sarah McMann, the minus 130 favorite. And I'll keep this one pretty quick since I think it's a pretty straightforward matchup, and there's really not much to break down here. Pena is coming off of, not coming off, but she had a 2.5 year long layoff after her loss to Valentina Shevchenko to give birth, and she came back in her return fight against Nico Montano, which was a really, really just boring fight. Montano was able to control Pena on the ground for most of the first round, and then Pena was able to get her own takedowns in the second and third round to win both of those rounds. But it was a very just kind of back and forth like grappling match, just not too much going on in the feet. Both chicks, kind of just switching positions, reversing, but a very grapple heavy fight. And then she was matched up with Germaine Durandamy in her most recent fight. Didn't look too good on the feet. I mean, her striking isn't great, but ended up, she got a few takedowns, but ended up just getting choked out. She Durandamy got a guillotine choke on Pena. Nobody really saw that one coming, but not too good of a look. But she's overall, Pena just, I guess she has a decent like wrestling game. Her defensive wrestling isn't great. She isn't good off her back. Offensively though, she likes to just hold her opponents down. Occasionally trying to look for the submission, but most of the time she's just trying to land that ground and pound on them, really just control them and do damage in the top position. But her striking isn't great. It's very rudimentary. But as far as how she matches up with McMann, though, I'd say it's pretty similar, because I think McMann is probably the better wrestler here. Well, she is the better wrestler, but on her back she's not very good either. So, man, this is we have two fighters that are pretty similar in that regard. Their striking, I'd say McMann might actually be the better striker here, but she's also 40 years old, and I don't know if I can trust her in her the cardio at this age, even though McMann is coming off a very impressive win against Lena Landsberg, but again, that Lena just didn't really put up any resistance. It was pretty much a blowout win, and when those happen, I don't think you can take too much from those, because the opponent just isn't able to put up much of resistance, and you're not really exerting yourself that much. It's you kind of just coast to victory in those. And while it looks good, I don't think it says too much about McMann, especially since in a couple of her most in her two recent fights before that, she just didn't really look good against Renault or Ketlin Vieira either. She had pretty much no answer once she was taken down herself and on her back. I mean, when she's the one that's doing like initiating the grappling and is the one shooting takedowns and is the one in top control, she's a lot better. But once you put McMann on her back, though, she gets completely lost out there. And the other thing, though, is McMann also finds herself in a lot of very, compromising situations, even when she's in top control. She gets a little careless sometimes, and like in that fight against Renault, she just kind of postured up and got a little careless, and Renault was able to lock in a triangle choke. And against Vieira, when she was taken down, I don't think she knew that Vieira was locking in an arm triangle choke, and she just didn't really know what to do. So the BJJ of McMann is kind of dubious in my opinion. So even if she does end up taking Pena down, I think Pena could be live for a potential submission. But then the other part of it is, if Pena is able to get the takedown and take McMann down, she could very easily just be sitting on top of McMann for, the rest of the round, since McMann doesn't really have particularly good get-ups, and man, her submission defense isn't great either. So I guess what it comes down to for this fight is who's going to be securing the takedowns. I think whoever is able to get their opponent, on their back first will likely win the round. So as far as that goes, I mean, it's really just it's a pick 'em fight in that regards. Like, McMann should be the one that's landing the takedowns, but at age 40, I don't know if she still has that explosiveness or the cardio to keep that going. So, I can't. It's a pass fight for me, honestly. It's not really appealing on either side, and honestly is a bit of a coin flip at this point. If you're really interested in betting this fight, I think, Pena by submission might be a decent pick or a decent bet at plus 700, since, again, McMann does find herself in pretty compromising situations even when she's in top mount. But if Pena is able to get top control, she might work the submission. She might go for the ground and pound, but at plus 700, not a terrible way to put 0.1 or 0.2 units, but not going to count on it. Honestly, pretty low level women's MMA fight. So, but if I had to go with a pick here, I'll go with McMann. I think she is the more credentialed wrestler, and I think she might be the one who will shoot for the takedown first. And I do favor her a little bit more in the striking department. So, in terms of a pick, it's going to be McMann, but I'm not touching this fight from a betting perspective. And in the next fight, we have Brad Tavares, the minus 135 favorite, versus Antonio Carlos Jr., the plus 115 underdog. And I feel like this is going to be a pretty straightforward fight to break down. Antonio Carlos Jr., we know what he wants to do. He'll want to take you down and just go for the submission. But if he isn't able to get the submission here, he's in a bit of trouble, as we've seen in the Ian Heinisch in the Ian Heinisch fight and the Uriah Hall fight, where he was able to get them down periodically, but wasn't able to hold Heinisch down for extended periods of time, and never really got to lock in any sort of submissions or submission attempts. So Heinisch was just able to kind of piece ACJ up on the feet most of the fight. And similarly with Hall, he wasn't able to get the submission, was able to lay on Hall for extended periods of time, and it was a really close fight. But I think rightfully so, Hall won. ACJ just wasn't doing really anything with the grappling. He was just stalling most of the time, whereas Hall was actually doing a bit of damage. And as far as how it's going to play out with Brad Tavares, I think it's going to be pretty similar. I mean, Tavares has decent takedown defense. Actually, I think he has pretty good takedown defense. And on the feet, I think he's just a much, much better striker. I mean, Tavares is a really good defensive boxer. He keeps his hands high and has a nice jab. And 1-2 and overhand. Also likes to throw really, low leg kicks, heavy leg kicks. But most importantly, though, I think his takedown defense is good enough to hold off the wrestling attempts of ACJ, who really only likes to trip and throw. So his wrestling isn't that great. The only other concern is that if ACJ will kind of just hold Tavares up against the cage, or if he's got Tavares on his back. Tavares isn't a very active striker or anything on his back, so I don't know how the judges are going to score that, but I think if Tavares is able to keep the fight standing for a good 2 to 3 minutes around, he should be able to land enough damage on ACJ to win on the scorecards, in my opinion. And I kind of looking over the rest of this card, I've been favoring a lot of these strikers over these grapplers, just because I think a lot of these strikers are going to be good at keeping the fight on the feet, and I don't think any of the grapplers right now are particularly high level enough to really capitalize on that. But in any case, for this fight, I'm going to go with Brad Tavares here. I do actually have a 1.35 unit bet placed on him. I think this is a pretty significant step down for Tavares here. He's been kind of fed to two prospects and didn't look really good, but as a gatekeeper, this is definitely one of those fights he should win, and I just don't think ACJ has the wrestling to keep this fight to the ground where he'll be able to lock in the submission. So the pick here is Tavares, and I do have a 1.3 unit or 1.35 unit bet on him. And in the next fight, we have Nasrat Haqparast versus Arman Tsarukyan. Tsarukyan is the minus 300 favorite, and Haqparast is the plus 250 underdog. And I don't agree with this line at all. I like Tsarukyan, and I definitely think he is got a ton of potential here, but I don't think the line should be this wide. I think Nasrat is being a bit overlooked here. But just kind of taking a look at this matchup, Tsarukyan, he's definitely the more hyped prospect. He's fought stiffer competition, and he's fought guys like Islam Makhachev and OAM and Davi Ramos, and gave a really good account of himself. But I think the performance in those fights really kind of inflated this line a bit, because he actually didn't do as good against OAM as I had originally thought upon rewatch. He was actually getting pressured a bit by OAM and was only able to kind of pull away with a bit of his wrestling, but OAM was doing some damage to Tsarukyan in the second round, I believe, either in the first or the second. He had a really good round against Tsarukyan, who he was doing a bit of damage, had him I think rocked for a little while too, but that wasn't a particularly good look, especially since he'll be going against Nasrat, who I think is a much better striker. And against Davi Ramos, he looked really good. He completely just outstruck Ramos though, but we all know Ramos isn't really a striker. He's primarily a grappler, and he prefers to get you out of there via submission. So I mean, still looked good though. He wasn't afraid to play in Ramos's guard. So very, very. I don't know if it's low IQ or if he's just really confident in himself, but he looked good in those fights. With that being said, though, he's going up against Nasrat Haqparast, who has really, really good striking. I think on the feet, he's going to be able to touch Tsarukyan up. I think he's a level or two above Tsarukyan in terms of, the striking. Nasrat has really good footwork. He likes to pressure and has really good just cage cutting. He's good at kind of just cutting opponents off and just doing damage to him. He has really quick hands, a ton of power, and really good head movement. So I mean, just on the feet, I think Haqparast should be able to do more damage, land a lot cleaner, beat Tsarukyan to the punch. Just I don't know if he's gonna outclass Tsarukyan, but he's gonna have a pretty clear striking advantage. And something that I don't really like to see from Tsarukyan is it doesn't look like he does well against pressure. A lot of the times when he's doing well, he's the one that's kind of pressuring opponents. He's going to be the one pressing forward, initiating the takedowns. But in this fight, I think Haqparast will be the one who's doing the pressuring. He's going to be the one that's moving forward, and Tsarukyan's going to be going back. And when Tsarukyan is on his back foot, he's not as good. It's going to be harder for him to time those takedowns. And man, I don't know how Tsarukyan is going to do when he's gets backed up against the cage. Generally, his takedowns aren't particularly good. He usually just likes to go for the single leg, and that's pretty dangerous against a guy like Haqparast, who, he'll threaten with the uppercut or the knee. And just overall, I think that Tsarukyan is going to have a hard time getting in on Haqparast here. I don't know. I don't think the line should be this wide. I think that it should be much closer. I'd say Tsarukyan should be capped at around like minus 150, 160 or so. Um, just because of the wrestling and level of competition he's fought. But as far as how the matchup, or stylistically speaking, I think it's going to be a tough one for Tsarukyan. He's fighting someone with very quick hands and very good striking. And if he isn't able to get this to the ground or hold Haqparast down for long enough, it's going to be dangerous. I think that Haqparast is going to do a ton of damage to Tsarukyan if Tsarukyan can't keep Haqparast on the ground here. So the pick here is I'm gonna pick Haqparast here, and I'm gonna I actually do have a unit on him right now. So so just to recap, I do have a 1 unit bet on Haqparast, and the pick is Haqparast. And in the next fight, we have Marina Rodriguez, the plus 255 underdog, versus Amanda Ribas, the minus 305 favorite. And a very interesting fight. The UFC has another prospect fight lined up, actually. And I think this is pretty similar to the breakdown for the Tsarukyan Haqparast fight. I think that for this one, Rodriguez is the much better striker in this matchup. I wouldn't say by like a crazy big margin or anything, but she's definitely the crisper striker. She has a good 1-2 and hook, and just overall just the much more fluid striker in this matchup. But the only downside I see for her is she's just way too lackadaisical on the ground. Like, she has no urgency to get up after being taken down. And unlike Haqparast, her takedown defense isn't particularly great, and her get-ups are definitely not there. But as far as what Ribas does well, her strike, she's a very well-rounded fighter, but she definitely excels a lot more on the ground, and that's where she's going to want to take it if she wants to win. And I see her winning pretty dominantly on the ground if she takes it there. The only thing is, she has struggled a bit with her striking, at least Ribas has, and she struggled a bit against Ronda Marcos at certain points before she ended up taking it to the ground. She was touched up a bit by Mackenzie Dern as well. So if this fight stays standing, I do favor Rodriguez here, but I don't think it will, man. It's just she's going to get taken down, and she's going to get held down. She has no get-ups, so no lack of urgency to get up either. So if Ribas is able to get Marina Rodriguez down, which I suspect she will, it's going to be a short or long night, however you want to, whichever way you want to, spin it there. But yeah, the pick is going to be me, Ribas, and I wanted to take a shot on Rodriguez, but the way she just is so complacent with just being on the ground is just got me not confident in her at all. So the pick here is Ribas, but no bet just yet. And in the next fight, we have Azaitar, the minus 156 favorite, against Matt Frevola, the plus 136 underdog. And this is going to be a pretty exciting fight. We have two action fighters going at it. Azaitar, I don't think he's had a fight go to a decision. This guy is just knocking guys out left and right. And Frevola, he's a pretty wild fighter himself, and he does like to take the fight to the ground. But yeah, I think if he wants any chance at winning this fight, he'll probably want to take Azaitar down here. Azaitar, he's been knocking guys out left and right, in the first round, and while that's good to see, it makes it a little hard for me to want to bet him, especially since you don't know how he's going to look outside of the first round. How his cardio is going to look in the second and third round, especially since he really loves to swing hard and really sit down on his punches. So I like Azaitar in this matchup. I would like to see a bit more from him. With that being said, though, Frevola again isn't high level. He's stylistically he's very hittable on the feet. So if Frevola isn't taking Azaitar down, then he's going to be in potentially a lot of trouble. And even if he is able to take Azaitar down, Frevola's top control isn't particularly great. So if Azaitar is able to get up, I think he's still very dangerous. So, I am going to lean towards Azaitar here, but I don't know if I want to bet this fight since I just haven't seen Azaitar out of the first round, so not very trustworthy in that regard. But the pick here is going to be Azaitar. I think he is going to catch Frevola here. Frevola isn't a very defensively sound fighter. Gets a little wild himself, so if he's not careful, he could very well get caught against Azaitar here. And so the pick is Azaitar. I don't think I'm going to bet this fight. Little bit unpredictable. Would like to see more from both guys before I put a bet on them in the future. But again, just to recap, the pick is Azaitar, likely first round KO, but no bet just yet. And in the next fight, we have Jessica Eye versus Joanne Calderwood, and it's pretty much at pick'em odds right now. Joanne Calderwood at -113 and Jessica Eye at -107. And honestly, I'm not excited for this fight at all. Even though both chicks are ranked, I consider this a pretty low-level women's MMA fight. Very basic striking on both sides. I do favor the output of Calderwood, but I'm going to keep this short because this really is a pick'em fight. This is a close fight. I think Calderwood has the volume, but Eye is probably going to be landing the heavier shots. And Calderwood has had a history of getting screwed out of these decisions. So the pick is going to be Calderwood, but man, I really don't care about this fight. The pick is Calderwood, no bet though. And in the next fight, we have Michael Chandler, the plus 117 underdog versus Dan Hooker, the -137 favorite. And I already did a breakdown on this, so I'll keep this kind of short, but I'll do it again anyways for this podcast. The line has been kind of moving all over the place. At one point, Hooker was actually the -120 favorite, and kind of wish I held off on betting him, but yeah, I think I'd put him in at like -135. I had him locked in at -135, but yeah, it seems like a lot of love was coming in on Chandler, and I really don't see why. Like, I think Hooker's the much more proven, even though Chandler was the ex UFC or Bellator champ. I just think that in terms of there's the stylistic advantage, I think he's the much bigger fighter. I think he'll have the better striking. He's the rangier guy. He's fought the better opponents, and just in terms of like a matchup, I just think that Chandler's gonna have a hard time getting in on Dan Hooker. Like, I don't know if people are just they like the power of Chandler or his wrestling, but Hooker has really good takedown defense, and he has a really aggressive guillotine as well, and a solid get-up game. So I'm not sure Chandler is going to be able to implement a grapple-heavy game plan against Hooker. As far as what Hooker does well, though, he has a nice leg kick, jab, and knee up the middle. So all of these things are going to be really good at keeping Chandler at distance and kind of preventing him from just shooting takedowns. Because that knee up the middle, is gonna be problematic for Chandler. If he's not careful with his takedown attempts, and the low leg kicks of Dan Hooker, he loves to throw those low leg kicks, and same with a lot of those city kickboxing guys. He's gonna be giving Chandler a lot of trouble. Who really likes to step on that or stand heavy on that lead leg, and over the course of the fight, he's gonna soften Chandler up quite a bit. The power is gonna start to diminish, and his takedowns probably aren't going to be as explosive. So I think as the fight goes on, I do favor Hooker too. And like I mentioned, I think one of the concerns I do have for Hooker is his tendency to get into these wild brawls and exchanges where, if he takes any damage, he'll start to bite down on his mouthpiece and start to just swing for the fences and really just fall back on his durability, which could be an issue against Chandler, who still looks like he has quite a bit of power and explosiveness in some of his punches. So that is one of the concerns for Hooker. The other being his cardio. But in a 3-round fight, I do favor Hooker. Hooker is pretty. He's a monster in those first 2 rounds. He can put on quite a bit of a pace, and he does fade away in the 3rd round a bit. But I think that Hooker can conserve his energy a little bit for that 3rd round and really just just survive for the last few minutes. He could probably shoot his own takedown, survive the last few minutes of that fight and win the decision. But in terms of what Michael Chandler does well, he is still very explosive. He's got quite a bit of power in his hand still. He's given up a lot of size, though, and he obviously still has that wrestling in his back pocket. But yeah, I have a hard time finding Chandler closing the distance, getting in on Hooker and landing those bombs. And as far as the wrestling goes, he hasn't really wrestled much in his recent fights because well, he's been knocking guys out, but the last fight that he had a wrestling heavy game plan was against Brent Primus, who I believe this was about like bit over 2 years ago. And at age 34 now, I don't know if Chandler is going to have the cardio to chain wrestle here. So it's especially if Hooker is going to be giving him trouble on the feet, and he's going to eventually start maybe shoot for panic takedowns. It's gonna make his takedown attempts a lot more telegraphed, and I think Hooker is gonna be able to time him well, or at least stuff the takedowns. So the pick here is Dan Hooker. I already have him locked in. I have like 4 units placed on Dan Hooker by mistake, but I'm gonna stick with my guns there. I think Hooker should be able to take it. I think at this point he's gonna be the younger fighter. He's still in his prime, and I think on the feet he's just going to give Chandler a lot of troubles. So the pick here is Hooker, and I do have about like 4 units on Hooker. And in the main event of the night, we have Conor McGregor, the minus 315 favorite, against Dustin Poirier, the plus 265 underdog. And man, I'm excited to see the return of Conor McGregor after what was effectively a year-long layoff. And say what you will about Conor, his fights always deliver. I don't think he's ever had a boring fight, and I think part of the reason is just because of his skill set, his ability to just really time his opponents, his precision, and his power. Like the way he's able to just mix all of that together and just knock guys out, even at the highest level, is basically what makes him must-watch TV. And obviously his out of the ring, his out of the ring antics and interviews definitely are a draw. But in terms of his fighting style, he brings so much excitement to the octagon here. I definitely think he's probably one of the top strikers, probably the second best striker in the UFC. I'd say behind Adesanya, but man, he's got a wide arsenal of strikes that he uses to set up that left hand, whether it's like the jab, hook, uppercut, front kick, even capoeira kicks to an extent. He hasn't gone to that as much because I think he's aware that it probably burns out his gas tank a bit, but oh man, as far as what Conor's able to do, he's just so good at getting the timing down on opponents, walking them down. I think his fight IQ is a bit underrated. He's very good at getting reads on opponents, setting traps, just all around a very 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 exciting and high level striker. And I know people are going to give him a bit of shit for for his cardio, and it is understandable. He does have like the worst body language, especially outside of the second round. He starts to sag a bit. His mouth is wide open, and it just doesn't look good. But I think it's a little overstated, though. I think that if Conor paces himself a bit, he could definitely stretch his power through 5 rounds. And we did see it in the Diaz fight where he knew what he was getting into. He game planned a lot better for that fight and didn't overcommit on any of his shots. And I think that's something that it's gonna be improved going into this fight. He's gotten quite a few years since that loss to Diaz, where he really honestly just overexerted himself in that first round, and then ended up getting tapped in I believe the second round. Yeah, in the second round after just pretty much unloading on Diaz there. And I think it was a good learning experience for Conor there, because I don't think he's going to make that same mistake again. He'll look for the kill, and if it's not there, I don't think he's going to want to rush it, especially in some of these 5-round fights. And going up to 155, he'll be fighting much much tougher opponents. That being said, though, I think that Dustin isn't completely, he's not completely lost here. I think Dustin does have a small chance here. He will have to take this fight. He will have to, be very smart defensively. He can't get too reckless, because, as much as people want to say Dustin has improved, defense, he's still a brawler at the end of the day. Like if shit hits the fan, he's just going to swing for it, and that's just not going to be a very very good thing to do against Conor, he's going to find the button. Like that's unquestionable, there's no question about it. If you look at some of Poirier's previous fights, against Hooker, Holloway, Alvarez, Gaethje, even Pettis to an extent, he takes a ton of damage. Like, he's able to kind of wear guys out, return the damage, and then get the KO. Just based off of like volume. But against someone like Conor, who's got the power and the precision and the timing, it's gonna be tough. He's gonna find the mark, and I don't think Poirier is gonna be able to take too many shots from Conor, to be honest. And I think Conor's still just a couple levels above Poirier at this point, where I mean, he's just going to be landing clean on Poirier enough to drop him, even if he's not able to get the KO. I think, you drop Poirier once or twice, every round, and Conor could easily win this on a decision. But again, the gas tank, that while I do think is a bit overrated, I think that still is a potential issue for Conor, especially since we haven't really seen him. He hasn't been really active. He did fight Cowboy last year, but he beat him pretty early, and we never really got to see how his conditioning looks. Conor has been saying that he's been feeling a lot better. This is the best camp he's had, but that's pretty much everyone says that in all their interviews. But I definitely believe it with Conor. He seems a lot more measured and mature and composed. So I suspect that he is gonna. He is gonna land clean on Poirier, but I don't think he's gonna overcommit. He's not gonna want to blow his gas tank. I think he's learned from his mistakes. So the pick here is Conor. I think Conor is still just a couple levels above Poirier at this point. So quick recap. I do think that Conor is gonna get Poirier out of there, and I don't know if you want to take Conor's word for it, and because he did call his shot here, he said he was gonna get Poirier out within the first 60 seconds. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but I definitely do think that Conor has the potential to get Poirier out of there in that first minute, or not first minute, that first round. That's when Conor is the most dangerous. But I suspect that even if it does carry on later through the fight, I think Conor will have what it takes to go 5 rounds. So the pick here is Conor. No bet just yet. This line is pretty crazy. Might put him in a parlay, but as of right now, no bet. But the pick is Conor. And that will do it for the card, everyone. Thank you for listening. I'm going to go ahead and recap all of the bets I've placed so far and bets that I likely will place. So first of all, I do have about 4 units placed on Dan Hooker, 1 unit on Nasrat Haqparast, and 1.35 units on Brad Tavares. A couple other fights I'm looking really closely at that I likely will place a bet on is Mahmoud Muradov and Zhalgas Zhumagulov. I do just favor the striking advantage from both of these guys, and I just think they're gonna be active enough on the ground to win a decision, or just do enough on the feet to win the decision there as well. But I've been really favoring the strikers on this card over the grapplers, and I think that could be a theme of this card. Just the strikers just completely outworking a lot of these grapplers, because I don't think any of these grapplers are particularly high level, and I think a lot of these strikers are much higher. The skill difference between the striking between these guys are pretty, I'd say, pretty significant. So I think I'm gonna lock in a bet on Muradov and Zhumagulov sometime a bit later this week. But as of right now, just the picks that I have on. Just follow me on Bet MMA Tips, actually. I'll have all those picks there, hopefully before Friday. And that'll do it for the podcast. Thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate the support. Hope you guys crush it this week. Take care, and good luck.